Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar, Hiring at Scale, Proven Strategies for Cultivating Robust Talent Pipelines. I'm joined by Hannah Pritchett and Abigail Chambley. They're going to be our speakers today. And we're also honored by a special guest. Our friends over at GEM are the ones that have made this webinar possible. And Zoe Wren from their team is joining us today. Welcome, Zoe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe from GEM. I'm so excited to be here today and hear our great speakers, Hannah and Abigail, share their learnings and perspectives on how to approach talent acquisition and innovate recruiting strategies to build quality talent pipelines and hire at scale. GEM is proud to be sponsoring this webinar as our talent engagement platform helps recruiting teams use data and automation to engage talent more deeply, build diverse, high-quality pipelines, and hire great talent at any scale. We have a quick intro video to GEM to show you, and then we can dive right into the discussion. If the video piques your interest and you would like to learn more about GEM, please reach out to us at sales@gem.com. Josh, feel free to take it away.
All right, I'm going to fire up this video.
Many organizations find it difficult to attract qualified talent that will drive the next wave of innovation at their company. And we're seeing this challenge across the industry, from large enterprise customers like Cisco and McDonald's to agile tech companies with amazing brands like Slack, Peloton, and DoorDash. That's why GEM was created, with the fundamental belief that the traditional ways of recruiting, like managing candidates from inbound sources like career pages, posting on job sites, etc., are no longer sufficient to attract the levels of top talent required to compete in today's digital economy, especially as it becomes harder and harder to find the right talent for key roles. So think data scientists, software engineers, or really any hard-to-fill role, because more and more companies are competing for candidates across the same limited talent pools. The challenge of maintaining a healthy pipeline is compounded by the need to attract for diverse talent. For organizations that value diversity, this makes the pipeline problem even harder because our inbound applicants don't always represent the most diverse talent pools, and we have no control over who applies. These challenges have driven companies to look at better ways to engage with talent where it is in the market. And that's why companies from Cisco to Twilio are taking a more proactive approach to engaging with passive talent rather than waiting for the right people to apply. That's why GEM was started. GEM's founders were engineering managers at high growth companies. As hiring managers, they quickly realized that the traditional tech stack for recruiting wasn't built to support the passive nurture of talent. Because ATSs were designed to track inbound applicants, this leaves most recruiting organizations stuck with managing relationships and passive talent outreach in manual, time-consuming, and error-prone processes like spreadsheets, one-off in-mails, and emails. This means a poor candidate experience, and so many miss opportunities in engaging with top talent when the timing is right. GEM was created to fill that void that exists in the market, a purpose-built platform to manage passive talent engagement and give recruiting teams that workflow, the automation, and analytics they need to be more efficient and consistently build great and diverse teams. And one of the great things about GEM is because all of these passive talent relationships are now tracked in one central place, you'll get much more visibility and predictability into your own hiring funnels, allowing your team to make more data-driven approach to recruiting and hiring.
And we're back. All right. Before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that today's content is being recorded. So by the end of the day tomorrow, you will receive an email from us, which will contain a link to today's recorded session. There is a chat feature. It's located at the right-hand side of your screen. Please notice that there's two tabs. There's a chat tab, which is good for general conversation, and there's a Q&A tab, which is a really good place to put in questions for our panelists today. This is meant to be a conversational presentation. We're actually doing this without any slides. So if you have questions, please tune in. Let us know what you're thinking, all of the stuff. And I apologize for the fan. I'm in Texas and our AC went out. So I usually turn that thing off. So if you're epileptic or there's a strobe effect, I apologize. Without any further ado, I'm joined by Hannah Pritchett and Abigail Chambley. And I will let the two of you take it away, and I will be watching the chat for any questions from our audience today.
Fantastic. Well, hello, everybody. And you can join me in keeping your fingers crossed that Josh doesn't melt in his room right now. Keep that fan going. We're rooting for you. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar today. We're going to cover a large spread of just things in talent acquisition. As Josh said, we're going to try to keep this really conversational, so we don't have any slides. Hopefully our faces will be entertaining enough, or just the topic will be entertaining enough. And we'd really like to generate chat and Q&A, because Abigail and I have spent a lot of time going back and forth, and you'll see we have some different perspectives to share here. And so we'd also love to hear in the Q&A function, like either any questions you have for us or any challenges. Conversational should include some debate. So really looking forward to diving in. Before we do, I'll just start off with some quick intros to us.
And let us know where you're tuning in from, because I don't see anybody in the chat, which is weird. So I just want to make sure that it's working.
Great. I'll start and set an example there, but I'm tuning in from Oakland, California, and imagining that I am on the beautiful California coast as I'm hiding the background of my kitchen here. I'm the VP of Talent at Binti. We're a Series B startup focused on building great tools and software for foster care systems across the United States, and ideally internationally eventually. So kind of in that mission-driven space. And I am the former head of talent pipelines at Stripe, where I led a top-of-funnel recruiting team. So you can see a lot of my perspectives coming from the top-of-funnel angle, although now, of course, I own the full recruiting cycle and scope. Abigail, you want to give an intro too?
I sure do. Thank you, Hannah. Abigail Chambley. I am calling in today from Atlanta, Georgia. Also very hot, but I am fortunate and I have my AC working. Sorry, Josh. So I really got my start in talent acquisition with agency recruiting. I supported administrative business operations type positions before I really started to lean into technology. I have been doing in-house recruitment leadership, goodness, for I guess about 7 or 8 years now. And I'm with Mission. We are an AWS Premier partner, so we help companies implement, manage, optimize cloud environments. We are definitely rapidly growing, so I really eat, sleep, and think nothing but recruiting. So really excited to be here today with all of you.
I should add before we dive in these intros, I only covered my time in recruiting, but Abigail and I are coming at this from slightly different angles, both from being more full cycle focused to more top of funnel focused, but also I've only been in recruiting for about the past 1.5 years or so. Prior to that, I ran some technical payment operations teams, a risk management team, an operations data team, kind of jumped around, but I spent a lot of time in that hiring manager seat working with recruiters before coming over to this side of the line. And I'm honestly really excited to be in the recruiting space now. It's a lot of fun. So we're going to dive in by kind of giving a big picture of the way we each like to think about recruiting, and then we'll go more specifically into what are some tools and tactics and tips and tricks. Lots of alliteration there for us, so hopefully everybody will enjoy that section. So I want to start a little bit with just some of what I see as kind of a traditional mindset in recruiting. And I think the traditional mindset is that you see yourself as here to fill a role. So, you have a hiring manager you're working with as a client, you do an intake, you understand the role, you post that role on some job boards, you maybe source some people who have done that role before, if you're lucky to have the time and energy and good tools for sourcing. I think many of us end up in recruiting positions where it just feels like just dealing with inbound or referrals is enough. And we're not really out there kind of setting a strategic path on the roles. You run some interviews, you close, boom, the job is done, you move on to the next thing. That mindset isn't totally wrong, but that mindset is actually part of what we want to challenge here in this webinar today. And the GEM video is an excellent introduction to this, and we'll go deeper into kind of our views on it, because that mindset isn't totally right either. And I think a better mindset to have in the recruiting space is you're here to grow companies, not just to fill roles. And I should clarify that we are coming from the perspective of in-house recruiters and in-house recruiting, but I do think a lot of this can apply to agency folks too, if you're really smart about kind of what's your portfolio and what's your pipeline. So if you think of yourself as here to grow a company, the company is your client, the whole company itself, and the hiring manager or hiring managers that you're working with are your partners in that quest. And this is a subtle thing, but then there's a lot of ways this plays out. So in terms of what that actually changes, let's take a step back and do some back of the envelope math, because I always love to think this way. So let's say you're trying to hire for a software engineer based in the US. Best estimate I could find on the internet is that there's about 4.4 million software engineers in the US. So let's say you jump into sourcing, you're doing some great sourcing, you're getting a 10% response rate or so from people who are interested. And so if you're really productive and you're talking to 15 people a week, you could screen all of them in just 512 years. Guys, isn't that exciting? So obviously I'm being a little bit facetious here. You, for your company, are only interested in the engineering talent who have worked at, say, the Big Four. So even if we're narrowing down to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft to pick relatively arbitrarily, we're still talking about 175,000 software engineers out there. So again, if 10% want to hear more about what job you could be offering them, you've narrowed it down to just 22 years of recruiter screens to find your person. So obviously these examples continue to be a little silly, and this isn't quite what any of us are doing, but it's the spirit of what we're often doing. And it's sometimes the spirit of what the coworker next to you is also doing, and the coworker next to them. Each of us narrowly focus just on our lane of like, I'm trying to hire a software engineer for this hiring manager. So like, let me go out into the market. And if you're doing that, you're not only setting yourself up for a like pretty steep hill to climb. I don't know about anyone else here, but I don't really want to do 22 years of recruiter screens. I have other agendas in life to pursue. But also you risk potential duplication and overlap. And you're not really thinking smartly about like a pipeline that is shared across the company, as opposed to kind of putting your blinders on and thinking about your role. So I hope you're starting to see where I'm going with this. When you have just one role to fill, or even a portfolio of one roles, which are each distinctly in their lane, you're almost certainly being inefficient. So in terms of what to do instead, I think a big picture thing here that's really important is to, as a recruiter, think of yourself as a talent matcher, not a talent hunter. If you're in that talent hunting mindset, you've got the blinders on, you're like, I have one job and I'm going to find the one person who fits that one job. If you're really thinking of yourself as running a system of matching and allocation, you can think of yourself as, I'm here for my company or my agency, whatever it may be, and I'm looking to fill roles across this company. And sure, maybe I have some hiring managers that I'm partnered with more closely. We almost certainly do. But a really great recruiter keeps that hat on of, I'm thinking about all the roles that are open across the company now and all the roles that are going to be open across the company in the future. And what I'm really out there doing is cultivating a portfolio of talent and then flexibly allocating that portfolio of talent across roles. And the other piece of this, so that's kind of benefit one of this mindset is increased efficiency. The other big benefit of this mindset is like, we are in the people business after all, and thinking of yourself as a hunter just for the one person that is perfect for this one role. Like, people aren't just puzzle pieces that only have one shape and only click into one interlocking spot. I'm doing a lot of puzzles with my 4-year-old, so that's my analogy that's top of mind today. But people are complex and people have lots of different skills, and I'll use myself as an example here. But like I've told you, I've been in operations roles, and I've reported into an engineering director because I was running a technical team. I'm now in recruiting. Many of those skills actually overlap, even if they don't look like it on paper. And so for me, and I'm sure for many of us out there, like none of us want to be classified just as here's the one job we can do, here's the one puzzle piece. We're all much more complex and all much deeper than that. And a great recruiter can kind of capture that complexity and think about that depth of people as we think about ourselves as being talent matchers and allocators across the system. So I'd say overall, if you're a great recruiter and if you're really aiming for thinking about it in the right way, you'll have this mindset of like first of all, a mindset of flexibility about what does a qualification mean and a real focus on skills. We're going to get back to that and talk about that more. And then second of all, a mindset of trying to opt qualified people into your network, into your company, into the way you're thinking about talent allocation, as opposed to that mindset of like, boom, 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 I just need to move through people and decide that they're not exactly the one right puzzle piece that's going to fit here. So that's my spiel, my view of the world. Abigail, what you got?
Yeah, I got some thoughts. So I don't disagree with you, Hannah. I think that you're making a lot of really good points, and I'm going to lean in a little bit because you mentioned we're in the people business, and I'm also looking at the chat and I'm seeing somebody mentioning dating matchmaking. I think that that's accurate, right? Because what you're saying, the systems, the operations of things, I think that's foundational, right? But at the end of the day, recruiting is relationships. And we cannot forget about that human element. That's what's going to help us succeed in the long term. And it's relationships not only with your candidates, but also the relationships that you have with your hiring managers, right? So, because if you think about it, she had mentioned your pipeline and the talent pool that you're kind of creating. How can you properly create a pool of candidates for your company without first understanding what motivates that candidate. And then how can you get that candidate interested in your company if you also don't know how to sell it to that specific person, right? So it's not just because really, if you think about it, a salesperson probably isn't interested in the same things that a technical person might be, right? So you have to really understand what gets them excited and what gets them, really geared up and willing to kind of give their energy and time to an interview process and to speak with you, right? So I would encourage everybody, on top of the systems and things of that nature, it's also imperative to remember the relationship, be curious, ask questions, listen with both your candidates and your hiring managers. I think that that's pretty critical.
David Marr has a really good comment. He says, recruiting and sourcing professionals are essentially talent brokers and should act as a bridge between the talent market and the internal hiring managers and needs. I think that's a great comment. I also want to bring everybody's attention to the right-hand side of the screen. We've got a downloadable offer that Jim has provided, how to create a structured process to nurture passive talent. So if you get a chance, click that link, download that white paper, and I'll stop interrupting at this point.
Don't stop, Joshua.
Don't stop. It's valuable stuff, especially some of these we're going to dive into tactics, but some of these instructions and tactics of okay, so once we've established the mindset, what then? What do I actually change about my day-to-day? I will say some background, Abigail, and I tried really hard to turn this into a debate format, where can we think the other is wrong? Fundamentally, as we worked through it, we realized we're talking about two sides of the same coin. So I come at this from a very systems and operations driven perspective, and I'll talk about some of the tactics for building that. And recruiting does need to be built on great systems so that you really can be that talent matcher and think about allocation. But we are still at the end of the day in the people business, and the people business requires connecting with people and being curious about them and understanding what are the needs internally. I talk about the company as this abstract thing, but the company is made up of people. Who do those people want to work with? What's the culture? How do you sell that to somebody? And how do you then turn around also and sell this candidate you found to the hiring manager or hiring managers where they may be a fit? So diving into the systems approach, and like I said, I'm going to come at this from the operations and system persona, and then Abigail can come be Hannah, you're missing some stuff here though. Let's not forget that personal touch. Now, there's a long list of things we could talk about here, and I think we'll be happy to go further into any of it as part of a Q&A. If there's things we're missing, start calling it out in chat and Q&A. David, great question. We'll go into deliverables for recruiters and sourcers, I think more at the end. One fundamental thing in the system for me is moving away, again, in this mindset, but moving away from thinking about the narrow puzzle piece or the job description, and you're trying to find that one person in the job description. That can lead to a mindset and lead to the approach where you're looking for well, if my job description is, if my job description is that you're going to be a salesperson, I need to find somebody who has done this exact job before and then wants to come do it at my company. Some people's careers do proceed that way. And so I'm not knocking that as an approach. What I'm knocking is that as the approach where the only people you are open to are the people that have done that exact job at a comparable company. There's a wide range of skills and experiences and backgrounds, and especially I am talking about diversity of all aspects here, where maybe somebody hasn't done that exact job at another company before, but they've done a similar job, they've built the skills, and they can bring fresh eyes and a new perspective to the space, and are really going to bring value to your company above and beyond what somebody who maybe is trained in a certain way, has done at another company, is stuck in their rut is going to do. So one of the things is I've built teams to do this. One of the tools that we've used here that has been really helpful actually is taking a taxonomic approach to thinking about recruiting and really building a taxonomy. And for some of you, maybe this is a word that you haven't heard since high school biology class. For others of you, this will be very familiar. But we basically took a step back and said, instead of looking at the candidate market in terms of just the jobs and the job descriptions that we have, let's create a shape of profiles of people and profiles of roles. And then especially where our company is hiring multiple roles, where is there overlap between these roles that we can classify them in the same sorts of ways? So, if you're familiar with this word from high school biology, think about it in terms of kingdom, phylum, species, et cetera. Two species of bird are not exactly the same as each other, but fundamentally they are both birds. So maybe you have a candidate classification system that says, I'm looking for a bird. And then this bird could translate, and now my analogy is getting confused, but like this bird could do any number of roles at my company. So we really stepped back and said, like, look, jobs X through Z on this list are actually just all back-end engineering jobs. And there is a back-end engineering archetype or talent profile or whatever you want to call it as part of this taxonomy. And then we went out, and I'll talk about this more in a second, with GEM, we built folders and profiles, we built folders and portfolios of people who are back-end engineers instead of portfolios of people who were, say, back-end engineers at a level 2 who wanted to work on this one infrastructure team. That allowed us to then nurture that portfolio of talent in a much more robust way and a much more like long-term focused way, instead of just like tactically, I am reaching out to you about this job only. We got to reach out and say, I'm reaching out to you to talk about back-end engineering roles at this company. Can I sell this company? And then kind of tried to match the person into the right open role at the moment as we were moving through the process with them. But kind of the first piece of that was like both thinking in terms of taxonomy and then actually writing down like, what is the taxonomy? You know, in a non-technical example, like we wrote a taxonomy that is like an operations program manager. There's often a lot of overlap between different types of programs on different types of teams that require someone with those skills. And when we had that taxonomy, we could actually then kind of classify people into roles on teams as disparate as our operations team and our risk team and our partnerships team, just based on this kind of like, you have managed programs in an operational space before. So that's kind of piece number one. In my case, in my team at Stripe, I actually hired a professional taxonomist to map this out because we were large enough and really operating at scale. But this is the sort of thing that even at a smaller company, you can start to think in this way and start really building talent pipelines and candidate pools in a way that is oriented around this like slightly higher level of abstraction instead of a way that is oriented only around the specific job. I think then the second big piece to call out is role visibility. So again, when you are partnered with just one hiring manager, you get to go deep and think only about that part of the world. But if you're really trying to think about this broader system, you have to, and as Abigail said, you have to be able to sell the company and think about the company and not just like this job. And you have to have some visibility into like, well, what other roles are open and like, how do we, what other roles are open? What are the basics of what that team is like, even if you don't know the depth of it? And kind of how can you help steer and guide candidates towards the right sort of places? And then lastly, and we'll wrap up because I think Abigail has a lot of great stuff to add here as well. The more this can rest on great tools and data, the better for you. Here is where actually I would be giving a shout out to GEM regardless of the sponsorship of this webinar, because I found it to be an incredibly valuable tool for thinking and operating in this way. But once we kind of sorted people into these portfolios in GEM by their talent profile, we could then look not only at, okay, how is conversion happening in a role, but how is our reach out conversion happening across this whole portfolio? Or like, who in this portfolio haven't we talked to in a while and we need to follow up on? Who was maybe the number 2 front runner for this role X over here, but we liked someone else better, but hey, we have role Y open that might be a fit. And GEM really helped us keep track of that, look at the data for that, and be able to kind of step back and reflect on our strategies for what is working or not working. I see a great question in the Q&A. I would love to save that for a Q&A period because I do have some things to say there, but I think they're going to take me in a longer tangent. So thank you, Elena, and I'm going to make a pin and we're going to get back to that question.
Yeah. And I want to kind of dig in again with like the GEM shout out, data is so important. And that really is kind of relational to having a good relationship, trusting relationship with your hiring managers, because, when we think about GEM, it can do wonderful things like show us how long a candidate stays in a particular stage. What are the pass-through rates? Are we identifying any challenges in our pipeline? And if you have a really good relationship with your hiring manager, you can kind of, it's easier to deliver maybe not so great news of, man, we're seeing a drop off after the hiring manager screen. That might be something that we need to unpack. It's just easier to have those conversations with the hiring manager when they trust you, and they really can lean on you for that sort of thing. And really kind of throwing it back to the very beginning of the call when Hannah was talking about how so many people see recruiting and talent acquisition as a very transactional kind of function within a company. I don't see it that way. And if I do anything on this earth, I want to make sure that we are leaving that mark. Like, that is not what we do. We are there to be a partner. And again, that starts with being curious. So Be curious with your hiring managers. You are an extension of every single department of the company in a recruiting function, right? So do your internal research, better understand the dynamics of the current team. So if you've got a team that's kind of like a lot of wild, wild west and nobody's really following process, wouldn't it be beneficial to add somebody that's really process oriented to the team, right? Ask those questions, really define the roles in the interview process and give those specific interviewers a focus. Know what requirements can be flexible, right? That goes back to the diversity piece. What's a hard requirement and what are we willing to flex on? Who can we give a chance to? Who are we willing to hire based on potential versus what they've got on their resume, right? And then again, kind of the relationship with the hiring managers, surface challenges early, review pipeline, review the time and stage, go over what you're finding in GEM. All of that is just going to continue to build on that relationship. But also, like I said, it's also about candidates, right? So you need to understand the market. I'm sure everybody on this call knows how competitive and crazy the market is right now. I've been doing this a long time. It is wild out there. So it's important to really understand, like, what's going on? What are people on the market for? Is it because they are being forced to go back into an office? What's the reason? Are they just ready for their next challenge? Can we give them that? But specifically understanding what motivates that candidate. Every single initial phone screen that happens on my team, we ask that question: what are your top 3 motivators? What gets you out of bed in the morning and get your feet on the ground? That's going to help you later on down the line. And like I said, it's important to ask the question, but it's even more important to listen. If you listen to what a candidate tells you, you can use that information later on down the road. And by doing that, you're fostering that relationship. You're going to continue to talk to them. So when the right opportunity does open up, you've already got them in your back pocket, right? So because I think that the point there is that we all know that the easiest candidate to hire is the one that's unemployed or that is actively engaged on the job market. But a lot of times those are not the individuals that are like the cream of the crop, if you will, right? Those aren't the ones that you necessarily want. That's why it's important to think about the long game. This is where your pipeline comes into play, and it's important to nurture that pipeline. So again, as much as Hannah likes to talk about operations and systems, I like that too, but it's also about making sure that we are building those relationships and we're maintaining them. Part of that is, of course, listening, but communication in general, right? Like if we think about from the very get-go, when you first engage with a candidate, maybe it's because you have an open role, or maybe it's just because it's an interesting profile that you want to talk to. Set clear expectations, right? Talk to them about why you're calling them. Talk to them about why you're reaching out and why you think they might be a good fit for your company. If you've got a built-out interview process because you've communicated with your hiring manager really well, and you've got that amazing relationship with them, you can set out those expectations, and then you just communicate early and often. It's very easy to think unkindly about a recruiter that doesn't talk to you, right? It's very important that you're there and you're willing to talk to those people. And then I would also say, just from a nurture standpoint, if you are thinking about the long-term game and making sure that you are focusing on the relationship, maybe you don't have an opportunity that's going to be a good fit for that person. Maybe overall, they're probably not a good fit for your company in general. That's okay. Be honest with them, build that trust, let them know, and also share the wealth. I have plenty of other recruiting leaders and recruiters in my network. If I've got somebody that I think is great, but they're not great for us, I'm going to share that candidate's profile, right? And then if you do that, that candidate again is going to be like, man, this is somebody that I can really lean on. This is somebody that's going to be there for me, that's going to tell me the truth and work with empathy. Because I think that that's important. And it's also really easy to forget about because we all are doing a million things. And I think that sometimes recruiting can be considered organized chaos. It's easy to let those things slip. Don't. Dedicate yourself to it and make sure that you're holding yourself accountable in that way.
I love the emphasis here. And I think some of the summary of a place where like a synthesis of what both Abigail and I are saying is like, we need to be building systems that we can trust. So like systems that are based on great classification, great data quality, like measuring everything. That's, my operations and systems perspective is like a good system is when you can trust and you have good feedback loops and you can measure everything. And I think a lot of what Abigail is talking about is like, and we're also humans working with other humans. And the more we as recruiters can operate with trust, whether that is like asking questions and actually listening to the answers, like, surprise, what a revelation, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do it, either one or the other of those things. Or then, really being open and honest with candidates about like where they are, what your process is, what you're looking for, and being willing to kind of, as Abigail is saying, like go the extra mile and give someone a boost if they're not going to be a fit for your company or for like your particular portfolio of roles. Hand them over to a friend, whether that's another company now. I'm a firm believer that right actions and right ethics come around to us eventually, and it's building that system of trust and that personal relationship of trust can really make a difference for how we're all recruiting and what we're getting done at the end of the day.
Hannah, data has come up a couple of times, and I just want to point out there's a new offer on the right-hand side of your screen. A GEM customer used data and analytics provided by GEM to scale their fast-growing team. So it's a great download, it's a great read. So check that out if you've got a chance.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's not about me and my teams, but I have been the customer using the data that I could get from GEM to then make decisions about both kind of how should we nudge our taxonomy, but also like, hey, there's certain parts of the market where our pitch isn't resonating. Like, why is that? Let's dig in. The response rates look dramatically different sometimes, profile across profile or role across role. So huge +1 from both of us on like, pay attention to the data and like really know what's going on. Whether that's the data you're gathering as you talk to humans, that's data too, or the data that you can get in aggregate about your systems.
Yeah, I agree with that. I say a lot. I'm sure my team thinks I'm a broken record, but data is kind of what predicts how our future behavior is going to be, right? Let's look at that data and figure out what we need to fix. Let's identify where we might be having challenges. Talk to your hiring managers about it, make them part of the team. That's all really, really important, I think, too.
So we're getting lots of great questions in the Q&A. Keep them coming. We're going to save a good chunk of this webinar for Q&A, and we'll explicitly address those. I think just kind of, we've talked a lot about our mindsets and a few of the tips and tactics. I think just kind of as a last shout out and a couple of additional thoughts before we move into the Q&A. One, as you've noticed through here, like we are talking about two different sides of the same coin. There's slightly different mindsets that Abigail and I are bringing to the table here. At the end of the day, I think a great recruiting team needs both of these types and both of these mindsets. So I think there was a shout out in the chat somewhere on like, this is where, say, recruiters and sourcers can have really productive relationships. Like, I quite naturally come at a lot of this thinking more like a sourcer and thinking more top of funnel about kind of how do I cultivate a pool of talent? I think Abigail comes at it a little more thinking it's like, but I'm working with a hiring manager. How do I actually get this done? How do I make sure that the role is filled? How do I find the right candidates for these roles? These are both incredibly valuable perspectives. So if you're in recruiting leadership or looking to go into recruiting leadership, I think this is a thing to pay attention to and think about as you build out teams. And I think a lot of people have some bias here, but I think a lot of people start building recruiting teams with like, well, I just need a recruiter. And those can then often be teams that tend to fall towards only the hiring manager side of the ledger and not thinking enough about the candidate side of the ledger. And then as a flip side, if you're hiring teams of only sourcers, you're not going to have that kind of like, well, what does the close look like? What does that hiring relationship look like? What does that talent advisement piece look like? So there's really a balance to be found as you're building teams. And in the same way, in the same way that we want to be advising our hiring managers on building out robust teams of people with different skills and like people bringing different things and different perspectives to the table, we want to make sure that we're building our own recruiting teams in those ways too.
Absolutely. I think it is about balance in that regard. And, that's having differing opinions, and that's where growth and innovation happens, right? If we can challenge each other in a really professional way, I think that's really exciting. And, I want to kind of bring it back again in my fight against people perceiving that talent acquisition is a purely transactional function within a company. It's not. And I really want to say that we should be thinking deeply about the strategy of recruiting. And so when you think about talent acquisition, don't think acquisition, think talent allocation, talent assessment, talent advisement, talent advocation. You can kind of use whatever alliteration you want in that regard, but the sky really is the limit, especially in this market. We have to be creative. We have to evolve because the market is speeding ahead of us every day, right? So we have to think creatively about recruiting. So don't let the acquisition part of talent acquisition hold you back, and make sure that your hiring teams and your candidates know that too.
And then just to Your last shout out on this, and everybody's going to have to put up with me being a super nerd for a minute, but hopefully this resonates to some of you as well as just me. But, you know, as we're trying to move away from the mindset of just thinking transactionally, part of it is like, how do we think about the big strategy and the big systems of this? And like the big picture of our jobs is there, and it's deep, and it's there, it's deep, it's interesting, it's complex. I think my additional shout out is just how important it is that we're doing these jobs really well. We'll get into this a little bit more in the Q&A, but like, is there a talent shortage right now? Yes or no? What's going on in the economy? Where I'm going to be a super nerd is that one of my favorite economics papers recently, and doesn't everybody have a favorite economics paper? Seems like yes. Is a paper written by a number of professors at Stanford, Chicago, a couple other places. It's called The Allocation of Talent in U.S. Economic Growth. If anybody wants to look it up and read it, it's fascinating and has a lot of math that is above my head. But nonetheless, the point is very clear. These economists were looking into essentially drivers of US GDP growth in the 20th century. And in their analysis, they found that improved talent allocation, I'll get to that in a second, was a driver of about 20 to 40% of US GDP and economic growth over the past 50 years. And what they're really talking about there actually is improved diversity of who gets to go into what fields. So they really looked at like, there used to be gigantic structural barriers for many groups of people moving into certain professional fields. Those barriers are not gone, but those barriers are reduced relative to where they were earlier in the 20th century. And they found that reducing those barriers and really looking out there across essentially across a broader candidate pool of like, who does have the inclinations and the skills and could be qualified to do these jobs, like, you know, doctors, lawyers, et cetera, is a lot of what they were looking at. Like that was not only obviously good for those individuals, that was good for the US economy as a whole. So, you know, it's easy to fall into our mindsets of just like, I'm just hiring this one role strategically, and to do talent, to do TA, we'll just call it TA, to do TA better, we should be thinking bigger picture than that. But then also just like to be contributing to society, like doing our jobs well contributes to society, I think, in some really positive ways. And like a rising tide can really lift all boats here if we're stepping back to think about who has the skills and we could take a shot on this job of like, who has the skills and the potential, and with a little bit of training, they're going to be amazing at this job because they're going to bring fresh perspectives and different ways of thinking about things. Again, instead of just falling back into that lazy pattern matching of like, someone who can do job X is someone who's done job X before at a different company, or someone who can do job X is someone who looks like this, or went to this school, or has this particular background. So I think the more we all as recruiters can keep open minds, and then we'll get into this in Q&A, like can persuade hiring managers to open up their minds too, the better we will all be doing on creating really strong teams, the better we will all be doing on diversity, the better we'll all be doing on this big picture talent allocation, which honestly like will benefit you, your hiring manager, your company. And then I firmly believe like society as a whole when we have some of these barriers reduced. So that is our hopefully systems overview, some tactics and tricks, and like hopefully a little bit of inspiration for you on this Wednesday as we all go back to our desks and start jumping on the phone with candidates again. Like we're doing something big and important and meaningful here. And even if it's hard, like that matters. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So I think that was our pitch, which means Abigail, we aim to leave about 20 minutes for Q&A. So giant high five on this.
Way to go.
Josh, do you want to lead us through the Q&A and kind of pick and choose our ordering here?
Yeah, we've got some good questions. So we covered the deliverables, and I don't have a pair of glasses nearby, but I'm going to squint and try to read this stuff. Let's see. So one that we kind of punted until the end, it kind of came up early, was you talk about hiring managers being your partner throughout the recruiting process. And you talked about avoiding tunnel vision when using a job description to find a candidate. How do you work with hiring managers who can't get past the tunnel vision?
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but Hannah, if you want to take it first, because you had called it out earlier, I'll let you.
I think you've got the deeper experience here, so why don't you go ahead and I'll jump in with anything in mind.
All right, cool. So hiring managers can be a challenge sometimes, right? And we really do have to nurture that relationship and make sure that we are identifying our challenges early and often. So I'm going to lean back on data. Is systematic as that is, data tells the story. I saw somebody else use that very phrase in the chat. I lean on that a lot. If we are not finding the right person because they want to hire somebody that is directly in a box. Again, like, oh, they have to have 1 to 2 years of experience. So somebody with 6 months of experience, I don't even want to talk to them. I encourage my team to keep kind of a running list of all of the people that we've really kind of presented to that hiring manager and why we have opted out in moving that person forward. And then when we get to a point where we're not being successful, all the people that we're running with, and again, I'm seeing a lot of, people questioning, like, more candidates doesn't always mean more success, right? I think that we have to use that data and leverage it and say, like, look, we are not finding what we want by using these really hard requirements. They should really be more of guardrails that keep us in line. But what I'm finding is we're seeing a drop off here, or all of the candidates that we think have high potential actually don't meet our requirements for this particular bullet point, right? Use that data to tell your story and just talk to them a lot. Because again, I think that consistently chatting with your hiring teams about what's going on, what's in the pipeline, that gives you the opportunity to surface those challenges early and say, like, look, I am noticing this thing, and I think that we need to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more I think that they will just organically understand that they need to open it up a little bit and they need to try new things. And listen, if we try new things or we go in this direction and it doesn't work out, cool, we scrap it and we go back to what was working, or we try something new entirely. But that's the whole point of evolving with the market and changing how we're doing things. We all know what the definition of insanity is, right? So I think that that's a big portion of it, is just making sure that you're surfacing them early and you're using data.
Chris Jones, great comment. He says, it all begins with trust, expectations, and depth of the role, company culture, mandatory to educate them and make sure they understand your process, the market, competitors, etc. I think that's a great comment.
Absolutely. Building on a little bit of that, and like Abigail's exactly right about pipeline data and data from past experience. If I can give another tool shout out, I've also found LinkedIn Talent Insights to be extremely useful on this. When a hiring manager has very narrow scope requirements, you can often go in and pull up, like, let's just look at how many people on LinkedIn have these narrow requirements that you are looking for. And you can often, if you haven't yet done all the pipelining work, you can often use that as a way to kind of open up their mind a little bit at the beginning. Like, by the way, like, you are looking for a unicorn. So if that's what you want to do, okay. But let me tell you about what some of the implications of that decision are going to be, as opposed to being a little bit more open-minded. The other thing I would throw in there, and this is just, basic influence and persuasion, but the more you understand the things that your hiring manager cares strongly about, the more you can make a difference on things like this. So I've had this in the past where, hiring managers being very kind of tunnel vision about their job, but I knew that hiring manager cared a lot about speed and speed to hire. And so I was like, well, you can be tunnel vision, but now let me show you that you're asking me for both being tunnel visioned in a very narrow set of requirements and to fill this job fast. And I can tell you that, like, on other similar roles where people have had a more open mind and kind of looked at this broader portfolio approach, they filled their job in about half the time. And that was often enough for that hiring manager to go, like, oh, okay, well, then sure, let's talk about the requirements. Or, in other cases, maybe the hiring manager cares a lot about diversity on their team. And you can say, okay, but remember, like, given structural barriers, when you're looking at this very narrow set of things, you are less likely to see a diverse candidate pool. So, like, if you're telling me you want diversity on your team, maybe we need to go back and loosen up these other requirements. So I think a lot of this is in just, like, it's in that relationship of trust. It's about being curious and asking questions. And the more deeply you understand, like, what constraints and pressures is that hiring manager operating under, and what do they care about for their team, the more you can then kind of use those to make your case for this broader systems approach.
100%. I've said it before and I'll say it again. And if you've tuned into some of these webinars, if you've seen 10 webinars, you've probably heard me say it 15 times, but getting down to what is success within a role, help your hiring managers understand that. Because I think a lot of times we're approached with kind of a grocery list or an ingredients list. And it's really easy to get tunnel vision when you're looking at, like, a list of ingredients. Whereas, like, just tell me what you need to happen. And so let's find out, like, what does success look like? And hey, this person can bring you to success. There is one more offer on the right-hand side of the screen. If you'd like to schedule a personalized demo with Gem, this is a great opportunity to click that link and drop in your information. And then, Hannah, with permission, I'll go to the next question in the chat. I don't know if I can glean the specific question, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. It's a little bit long. It's from Eric. What are your thoughts on this hot take? There isn't a talent shortage. Companies are bad at hiring. They don't know how to write good job descriptions, and they look for characteristics that actually predict. They don't write good job descriptions and look for characteristics that actually predict job success. Hey, that's kind of what I was talking about. Instead, they go for lazy and overly restrictive filters like minimum years of experience, having done the same job previously, on and on and on. Other companies write overly broad job descriptions, which causes them to get a flood of candidates that are not properly matched, so on and so forth. So I think the gist of this is there's not a talent shortage. Maybe companies are just not doing a great job at hiring. What are your thoughts on that?
I'll go first. It is a hot take, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. It might be a little bit of both, though. I do think that a lot of times there are companies out there that are not doing a great job at hiring. They are not asking the right questions. They are being too rigid with what they are looking for. I had just mentioned that a little bit ago. And I think that in those scenarios, that's where, education and coaching kind of comes into play with your hiring teams, of letting them know, like, I hear you, but if we go into this box and say that we can't see anybody or talk to anybody outside of that box, it might take us a little bit longer, or we might not get the person that's going to fit our compensation bands, or whatever that might be. Education is really important, but I also, challenge them a little bit. Again, if you have a good relationship and they trust you, you can do that. And you can say, all right, I hear you. I know that you want somebody that fits inside this box. I'm going to go find it for you. But would you be open to having me also present a couple of folks outside of the box that maybe instead of hard years of experience, have what's the word I'm looking for here? Have the ability based on the things that they've done in a very short amount of time. It's more about what they've done versus how long they've done it. Would you be willing to talk to a candidate like that? Or I know that we have that they need a 4-year degree on this job description, but I bet that we could find somebody that has a 2-year degree or no degree at all that could really do this job. Would you be willing to at least talk to them or look at the profile? I promise you, I won't steer you in the wrong direction. It's going to be worth your time, because really at the end of the day, we're partners. I am an extension of your department. Your success is my success. I don't want to waste your time. Can you give me that opportunity? And just ask the question. And again, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about of if they have tunnel vision, ask if you can just get their permission to show them something that's maybe a little outside of the box. But I don't necessarily agree that, or necessarily disagree that there's a talent shortage. I think that a lot of times we're not doing a good job of writing our job descriptions. We're not using gender neutral language. We're not asking the right questions. We have a very small amount of time with candidates, right? Like a really small amount of time. And we're supposed to be able to predict, oh my gosh, they're going to be able to do this, no problem. We need to make sure that we're asking very pointed, very focused questions, so we're getting the right data in a very short amount of time.
Totally. And we're using very dated, archaic, historical models, probably. I mean, not to call you out, Hannah, but, there's non-traditional candidates out there that might have had a non-traditional journey through their career. Hannah is one of my favorite people within TA right now. And if you look at her career, it's not the typical path of a TA leader, which is really exciting. And I think within many disciplines, we need fresh eyes and fresh insights, and we need to look at talent in different ways.
Right. I have a degree in linguistics and 10 years of operations. Isn't that the background for a TA leader? I thought that was standard. I love this question because I think this is getting at the crux of what we're talking about here, which is like, I'm going to leave the question to the economists about whether or not there is a talent shortage. Although what I would say there is I'm a firm believer that there is no shortage of human potential in this world. And so often when people are talking about a talent shortage, they're talking about talent classified in a very limited way, like people who have this 4-year degree or people who have done this job before. I'm a firm believer that when you open doors, people often, when you open doors and you invite people in and you give people the support, people really often rise to those expectations and rise to the challenge. And many of the best folks that I've worked with in their jobs have not had college degrees or have come from very non-traditional backgrounds and have been unexpected, and someone took a shot on them And I think their potential was through the roof and their ability to perform was through the roof. So I think, yeah, but like coming back to it, I love this question because I do think, yes, many companies are bad at hiring, and they're either writing these kind of very narrow, like they end up writing these very narrow exclusionary, like the person who will do this job looks like X, and that just leads us into this really short-sighted pattern matching thinking instead of a broader thinking about who can actually do this job, whose potential do we want to take a bet on? Like, what support can we give someone to do this job? I also think another place recruiters can or should be very influential is I often think sometimes companies complaining about a talent shortage are just being short-sighted themselves on like, who do they consider talent? Sometimes they're also running into a shortage of talent that wants to work for them. And there are things at the company that like, recruiters should also be influential voices in the company of like, what do candidates want? We've been talking a lot about like, how do we decide and we assess, but this is always a two-way matching thing between candidate and company. And I think, as I look out at the wild market, I think a lot of the companies, it is a wild market, but I think a lot of the companies encountering big hiring problems right now are not listening and paying attention enough to like, and what do candidates want? And how do we make ourselves a place where people want to work? And not just, and how do we choose the people who we want to work for us? So I think this is a great question. And like, yes, I'm on board with the hot take with these nuances of definitions in there.
I like that too. And I just wanted to really quickly say one more thing, because Hannah, you had mentioned like, how can you support this new hire if we are to hire somebody based on potential and whatnot. And then David had mentioned hire for attitude, train for aptitude. That's where really understanding the dynamics of the team and what success looks like for that particular person, because maybe that hiring manager does have the ability to go in and really support them. And can we really draft up a great and solid onboarding plan so we are giving that candidate or / new hire all of the tools and resources that they need in order to be successful, and help them see that, because sometimes they don't. They think that we just have to get somebody that's wrapped up with a nice bow. That's just not realistic anymore. We really do have to give people an opportunity and like David said, train for aptitude.
Absolutely. We're almost out of time. We've got probably time for a couple of more questions or comments. Since we've got a little bit of gap, I'm going to drop in a link for Talent 42, shameless plug. It's our first in-person event that we're doing in over 2 years. It's going to be in Seattle at the end of the month. It is our premier tech recruiting conference. So if you've not checked out that agenda, please do so. And if you check out the agenda and you like what you see and you want to go, reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can give you and your team a code for 10% off your ticket. I don't have that code right in front of me right now, but I can find that code for anybody that reaches out. Let's see. Jeremy had a good comment about ATS fog that doesn't help with candidate identification and finding them. And I think in this market where we're kind of like, are we fully remote? Are we hybrid? Can you work there? Can you work here? That's also creating some challenges with even figuring out who to reach out to sometimes. Let's see. Eric Zhang says, good point on the matching thing. I think there's a bias where companies think they have all the power and therefore don't have to appeal to candidates or provide a good experience. Oh my gosh, we've all seen that. It's well overdue, this shift in power. Of course, try to convince people in your company like I have that this attitude is wrong and it will fall on deaf ears. It's true for some organizations, but it's amazing how quick that pendulum swings back and forth. I think we're watching the pendulum swing yet again a little bit.
I think it's true for some companies. I also just want to throw in, like, as recruiters, we're not the only ones making these decisions, obviously, but like, I think we can and should be doing our best to be voices in these conversations. And like, again, I don't know what's going on with your company or who has spoken and who has listened or anything, but I never want us taking an attitude of fatalism or like, they'll never listen and not trying to also be the voice of the candidate. To Abigail's earlier point, like TA could also be talent advocacy. And, thinking of ourselves as matchers, we need to be thinking of ourselves as two-way brokers in this marketplace. And the more we can also be doing to persuade our companies with I think some of these same techniques of like, the more you have great data, the more you've like asked candidates questions and listened to the answer, the more you understand what do the leaders at your company care about and how can you appeal to the things they care about with the data you have. I think we all have an opportunity to be really influential through this crazy time on like helping companies understand that they don't always have all the power. And that, you know, again, regardless of where the pendulum swings, I'm like, if you're a person who cares about equity and justice, I'm like, I want both parties to have power here. And like in an ideal world, this is a marketplace in which both parties have power and agency. And I think like this is more shout outs to like where recruiting can be really important and influential in the broader picture of how companies behave. I think this is a place too that I would say like, you know, again, not every company is going to be perfect in listening, but the more we can all be like trying to be that voice and trying to bring that data and trying to kind of appeal to the decision makers on behalf of the candidates, the more I think we're also playing a really important function in not only how our companies work, but like, guys, how our society works, how our economy works. Like this is bigger and deeper than just kind of what we're doing tactically on a day-to-day basis.
We've got a question about brand awareness. I'm going to go ahead and say we do have some webinars coming up in July. There's two. There's one, Rapid Wins in Recruitment Marketing. There's another one, How to Build an Employee Ambassador Program. And then there's another one that I'm going to add for later on in July about surfacing stories and narratives within your organization and how to kind of get that information out in front of the right people. So Hannah, Abigail, if you have insight on building brand awareness, please share. But just to let everyone out there know, we're planning some more content around these topics too.
I've run a talent brand team and have a lot to say, but probably more to say than I can fit in 2 minutes. So I'll echo your plug for a later webinar on this. That sounds great.
Okay. Eric asks, are there data-driven solutions for smaller companies? Large companies tend to have more access to data that would help with measuring recruiting outcomes. That's an interesting thing because I just did a webinar and one of the panelists was from Walmart, and you talk about having all of the data.
No kidding.
Kind of envious. Like, what does Walmart do?
I can chime in on this because I'm at a rapidly scaling company. So we have not always had the means to purchase solutions that can just give us data at our fingertips. I would honestly recommend tracking the number of candidates that you have in pipeline on a weekly basis, the number of folks that are moving into the final stage, how many offers were signed, how many interviews did your recruiters do, what's the percentage of pass-through rate there? You can figure that out pretty easily, right? Track it manually if you can, and do it on a weekly basis, and then notice the trends over time. It's not ideal, it's manual, it is a little bit of a lift, but I think that it can still tell a really great story.
There's also, just throwing an extra plug, and this sounds like I'm a hired shill for GEM. I swear I'm not. I'm just a really happy customer. I have actually found working with my GEM reps, both at a larger and a smaller company, to be really helpful in terms of providing benchmarks across the industry. So to Abigail's point, like absolutely make the effort to track manually within your company, but then whether GEM reps or Greenhouse, I know, has put out a number of helpful materials here. Lever has, like many of the main ATSs will often publish articles that will include some benchmarks. So for myself at a smaller company over the course of the last little while, I've been tracking a lot of things manually. And then I've also just been like, the GEM reps are my friend, the Greenhouse reps are my friend. Those happen to be the systems that we're using. And then Google has been my friend as well, of just like looking around for where can I find industry benchmarks. So, maybe I don't have robust enough for a large enough sample size in my own world, but I can at least go to hiring managers and help do that education with like, here's how things often work, or like, let me set your expectations on industry things. And then we have a comparison point.
We are out of time. I really hope that we can put together some more content together. It was really great having the two of you on this webinar. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. Thank you, Jim, for sponsoring today's content and making today's webinar possible. For everybody in the audience, if you'd like to schedule a personalized demo, there is still a link on the right-hand side of your screen so you can get that set up. Today's content was recorded, so by the end of the day tomorrow, you will receive an email from us that will contain today's recorded content. So you can watch this as many times as you like. We know you will. And you can share this with your friends and colleagues who might have missed the live broadcast. And all of the downloadable links will work with the playback as well.
Thank you, everybody, for your attendance and your time and energy and attention and excellent questions. This was really fun.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.